All right, I'll tell you what, I'm going to get started, and anybody else that comes in. Uh, so you know who I am by way of a quick introduction. My name's Mike Ball. I work for a company called Kforce. We are a specialty staffing technical recruiting company. We're headquartered out of Tampa, and I'm responsible for the Grand Rapids office. We've got an information technology group, an IT consulting group, finance and accounting group, and then an engineering, operations management, and supply chain group. We've been in town here for 26 years. I've got 21 people in the office, and I personally have worked for Kforce for 11 years. And all those 11 years have been in Grand Rapids. So pretty familiar with the local employment market, and then also how companies' hiring practices have changed. What I try and do during these is give an overview of what I see as some of the major changes and how companies hire, and then that gives you, and at the end we'll have plenty of time for question and answer to do that. So we'll see if we can get this thing to work this time. Hey Penny, hold on one second. This is not working again. If you could go grab that guy. Okay. Sorry about that. We'll continue on, and then they'll get the PowerPoint up to speed as we move forward. So that's what I try and cover with a small group like this. If you have any questions, normally I have people keep them to the end, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let us know. First thing I like to cover with people is how hiring practices have changed. How many people have been 10 years since they've been in the employment market looking for a job? Okay, even 5 years, things have changed quite a bit. When I started for Kforce, no email, no internet, we were still faxing resumes. Job searches were primarily done through the Sunday paper, very local. Companies would place ads in the want ads. A lot of that has changed now. It's quite a bit different. And so the first thing that I think everybody needs to be aware of when they look at job search in West Michigan in 2009, when the economy is slower like this, companies are much more specific in their hiring criteria. It used to be, even 2-3 years ago, we'd go to a company, they'd give us a list of 10 criteria for candidates. And we'd say, which 3 do you really need? And they'd say, hey, if you can get me A, B, and C, we can work with the rest and work things out. When the economy softens, companies become much more strict on those criteria. So now they're telling us all 10. What that means for you as a job seeker, you're still going to apply to quite a few jobs. You're still going to go after them. But you have to realize for a job to come together for you, it's got to be a pretty good fit. You've got to have the skills that the company is looking for. It's got to line up. I have a lot of people tell me, hey, I could do this job or I could do that job. And it's not my role to tell them they can or they cannot do that job, but they have to realize they're competing with a lot of other folks who may have done something closer to that for them. So moving into new types of roles can be challenging at times like this. The other thing that it really shifts around when the economy slows down is that a lot of companies have hiring freezes on. They're not allowed to bring in people on a direct hire basis. And so the way they're getting a lot of work done and the way they're accomplishing a lot of things is through contractual or consulting type of employment. To give you an idea, our engineering group as recently as 2002, 2003 was probably 95% direct conventional placement, 3 to 5% contractual placement. Right now we're about 50-50, 60-40. Companies are unsure of their long-term business outlook, and so that causes them to scrutinize adding headcount a great deal. In order for a hiring manager to get approval to bring in a new person, they may have to go all the way up to the VP or president level for approval. If they have the budget and they've got a problem that needs solving and someone brings the skills to solve that problem, they may have $10,000, $15,000 in their budget to solve that problem. You may be able to do that for them on a contractual or consulting or project basis. I give that to you to help you adjust your perspective when you're in a job search. A lot of times people will ask questions like, are you hiring? Do you have any open jobs? And if you're asking those questions, the answer you're going to get from about 95% of companies right now is no. But if you're talking to a manager and you say, what are your greatest challenges right now? What are you struggling with? They come back and say, gosh, our inventory accuracy is horrible. Every manager has had to scale way back. Everybody, their people are all stretched thin. They're getting by with the minimum they possibly can. They may have problems. That can be a great foot in the door if you're in the job search mode. Couple of questions you need to ask if you're going to look at contractual employment. You're going to want to ask whether or not benefits come along with the position. Some instances they do, some they don't. We offer benefits to all of our contractors or consultants, but that's a question to ask ahead of time if you're considering a job like that. To give you an idea, just to order of magnitude, out of our office in Grand Rapids, just in West Michigan, between our 3 divisions, we've got about 130, 140 people out on contractual assignments right now. And those are all white-collar, professional type of jobs. So it's pretty prevalent out there right now. And then the last item that I like to talk to people about when we're talking about how things have changed from a company perspective, how many people have sent out 50 resumes and not heard anything back? Everybody's in that boat now. The expectations for feedback from companies are almost zero. And the reason I tell you is psychologically as a job seeker, it can be very hard. I have a lot of people come to me and say, what's wrong with my resume? What can I do to improve this? You know, what am I not doing right? Because I'm applying for all these jobs, I'm sending out all these resumes, and no companies are responding to me. What you need to understand is that's just the norm right now. HR departments have been cut like every other department in this downturn, so they're short on staff to respond, and it's coupled with the overwhelming number of responses you get. We just filled a director of procurement for a company in Zeeland. Within 24 hours of when we posted that job, we had 170 responses, people that had applied for it. And so the volume is just overwhelming. We send everybody an automated response that thanks them, but most companies don't anymore. And so what you need to understand is that there's nothing wrong with you. There's probably nothing wrong with your resume if you've done a good job writing it. That's just the way it works right now. The cordialness of the job search, there isn't as much of it as there used to be. And so if you don't get responses, don't let that get you down. Don't let that slow you down. Okay. The internet. The internet is something that people have a hard time getting their arms around, usually in a job search. It is a major tool that people use now. Almost all jobs are posted on the internet now, as opposed to in the Sunday paper the way it used to work. And so what I try and do is just give people a couple of tips as far as using the internet. The first thing that you need to understand about the internet is it is a high volume, low quality tool. Doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't apply to jobs on the internet. I would encourage everyone to utilize the internet as far as their, as far as their job search goes, but you have to understand the volume of postings on the internet is huge. If you look at it from my perspective in the recruiting business, every time I placed an ad in the Sunday paper, it cost me money. I can place as many jobs with as much verbiage as I want anytime for no incremental fee. I pay a flat fee to the job board. So from that perspective, the volume of postings goes way up. The number of responses to those postings can be overwhelming. I just told you about the spot where we got 171 responses in 24 hours. And so the internet is one tool in your job search, but you shouldn't use it in isolation. If you're applying to a company, see if you know anyone that knows there. You still may have to apply through the internet, but follow it up with a phone call. Follow it up with that personal touch. Follow it up with marketing, because otherwise there's a lot of clutter on the internet. It's hard to break through, okay? Success rates, I don't want to quote any statistics because there's a lot of debate about that. They're fairly low, and the feedback expectations through the internet are the same as we just talked about. don't anticipate a lot of feedback. If you look at a spot and you want to apply to it, if it looks like a great fit, do some research. Try and find out, someone in the company that you can reach out to in addition to submitting your resume so you can try for that personal touch. I get a lot of questions about recruiters and what recruiters can and can't do for you. I am a recruiter, and so a lot of people have varying opinions. There are a lot of good recruiters out there. There are a lot of bad recruiters out there. So what I try and do is outline to people what we can and can't do for you. First of all, who do you all think we work for? We work for the hiring companies. They're the people that pay us. When you're dealing with recruiters, never, ever, ever, ever pay a recruiter if you're on the candidate side. The hiring companies pay us for our services. I have only met one person in 11 years that got a job on a pay-for-service recruiting type of scenario. Normally what that results in is just an automatic download of spots as they're posted on the internet that you get. You can get that on your own. Don't ever pay a recruiter for services. We work for the hiring companies. Hiring companies come to us for a variety of reasons. They either can't find what they're looking for on their own, they don't have time to do a conventional search, it may be a confidential replacement. So there are a variety of reasons they come to us, but they come to us for candidates that meet a certain set of criteria. A recruiter cannot put you into a job for which you're not a good fit. We can't. If a company comes to us with these required experience sets or skill sets, we need to provide candidates that have those, or they're not going to be a customer for us for very long because they're going to feel like we're not listening to them. So I always tell people, sometimes they'll think I'm the job fairy and I've got a desk drawer full of jobs. I can only submit people into jobs for which they're a good fit. Now, a recruiter does have an obligation to be honest and direct with you, and if you're not a great fit for a job, they should be able to tell you why and explain it to you. But a lot of times people will look at us as an ally, which we are. We can do a lot to help you, but we can't, take an accountant and make him an engineer. We just can't do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in business for very long. So that's rule number one. The other thing that I get asked about quite a bit is the bottom point there, is how to partner effectively. Because to give you an idea on the recruiting industry, we can be a tremendous asset to you if we're working on a spot for a company and they've asked for our help. Because at that point, we'll sit down with them, we'll go through the ins and outs of the position, we'll understand the culture, we'll understand the personalities of the hiring managers, all of those type of things, which we can then share as we help you get organized through an interview preparation. We'll also follow up after any interview, so if there are any confusion about what happened, we can help to iron that out too. We can only do those things when the company has actively solicited us to participate on the opening. What you have to be careful of with the recruiters, sometimes they'll be working on spots that they haven't been asked to work on. They'll see a posting on the internet and they'll try and find people that would fit that without being invited to work on it by the company. That's a bad deal for everybody. So a couple of tips that can keep you out of trouble. One, try and find someone who's been in business for a little while. Average lifespan for a new recruiting company is about 7 months. There are low barriers to entry. People come and go pretty quickly. So try and find someone that's been around for a little while. Second, find someone that takes some interest in you and what you're looking for. Okay? If a recruiter doesn't sit down with you, understand what you're looking for, both from a job perspective, but also location, other things that fit for you personally, what your personal situation is, they probably don't have your best interest at heart. They're probably not doing a very good job for you. The other thing is the hiring companies will expect us to know that information. So if they're not asking you, what you want to make, where you want to live, all of those type of things, they're probably not providing much value for you or the hiring company. All right? And then a rule to use with all recruiters, don't work with anybody who will not call you first, tell you who the company is, tell you what the job is, and get your permission to send your resume. Okay? There's absolutely no reason that a company shouldn't share that information with you. If they don't, chances are what they want to do is shotgun your resume. We call it spray and pray in our industry, where they send it to a bunch of different companies and hope somebody comes back with interest. The reason you don't want that to happen is if your resume is submitted on a position for which a company is not using a recruiter, through a recruiter, they're probably going to look at applicants that did not come through a recruiter first, and you may cost yourself some opportunity. So it's a simple business courtesy, but a phone call and asking permission before your resume goes anywhere. Resumes are another hot button topic. And I'm going to preface this by saying there is no one right way to write a resume, okay? What I'm going to do is give you my opinion of what I feel has been most effective based on my 11 years of doing this here locally, okay? You may get other advice even at this event. I'm not saying one way is right, I'm not saying one way is wrong, everything's situation specific. But I think there are some fundamentals that will apply no matter what. First of all, what to include? Quantitative responsibilities and accomplishments. What have you done? Responsible for a budget of X dollars. Responsible for a team of A consisting of quality engineer, project engineer, engineering manager, controller for a privately held company with $50 million in revenues. Whatever it is, quantitative responsibilities and accomplishments. A lot of times people will put a lot of generalities, a lot of what I would call fluff in their resume. Synergistic team player who communicates well with other people, take it out. Nobody cares about that kind of stuff. You want it to be grammatically correct, you want it to be written well, but what companies really want to see, what have you done? What are your accomplishments? What were your responsibilities? So that's what you want to put in. I get a lot of questions about how long a resume should be. Should it be 1 page? Should it be 2 pages? Should it be 3 pages? The answer is it should be as long as you're including good, relevant information. When you get to irrelevant fluff, then stop. I've sent resumes that are 1 page, 2 page. Going beyond 3 pages, I think, is pushing it a little bit. But if you're putting good information in, you can certainly go out to that type of length. How many people use the same resume for all the spots that they apply for? Okay. How many people use a cover letter to tailor their approach to any individual spot? Okay. I am not telling you not to do cover letters. I think you should do them. What I'm telling you is most of the time nobody reads cover letters. They get lost. And so I think a one-size-fits-all resume is a mistake, and I think tailoring to a specific opening in a cover letter is a mistake. And I'll tell you why. It used to be when the ads or the jobs were all posted in the ads on Sunday, you wrote a cover letter, put a resume, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, sent it. Whoever opened it up, it was a little more of a formal, I guess, mailing to the person. Now they're almost all sent electronically. Resumes in one file, cover letters in the other file, okay? I would bet you $1,000 9 times out of 10 the cover letter file never gets opened up. The only time I read them is if I want to verify somebody's ability to communicate in the written format, okay? So having said that, I'm not going to say don't send them, but make sure when you're tailoring your background to a specific opening, you're doing it on both the resume and in the cover letter. Because the risk you run if it's in the cover letter is that the people who are responsible for making the decision are not reading it or are not getting it. The best way that I've seen to do that is a skill set summary. You put 6 or 8 or 10 bullet points or however many are appropriate that are geared towards that specific opening. And I like a chronological resume because I think it's the most direct. Education, skill set summary, job, most recent job to least recent job, in that order. The one thing I will say is we seldom send out a resume without tailoring it. And by tailoring it, we don't put anything on that's untrue. You always want to be truthful because in the process of truth always boils its way to the surface. And you want to be accurate, but if you've got the skills that a company is looking for, you need to make sure those are front and center, middle of the first page, so that they don't miss them. That's what will move you from the maybe pile to the yes pile as far as interviews go. And so I am a firm believer that if you're serious about a spot and you've got some information, you should be tailoring your resume to that spot. All right? Interviewing tips. We could do a whole hour on interviewing tips, but I'll hit a couple of highlights for you folks that are universal. Keys to a successful interview. How many people think that most interviews that are screwed up, it's because of what the person says in the interview? I would tell you that for candidates that are qualified for a position, the most common mistake that keeps them out of a role is that they don't listen. They don't listen to what the person is asking. Interviewing can be a very stressful event at a time like this, especially if you're without a job or when the economy is turned down or it's a job you really want. Couple that with the fact that most people don't interview very often. You know, you may interview 6, 8, 10 times in your entire life. You know, if you stretch that over a 40-year career, that's not very often. And so it can be a very stressful thing. Because of that, people will go in and a lot of times have a predetermined idea of what they want to share. If you get into that, chances are you're going to miss the information that the interviewer is looking for. I've interviewed thousands of people, and I start them all the same way. I'm a creature of habit. What you've done is important to me, but what I'd really like to talk about is what you want to do going forward. What are your goals, short-term, long-term? And almost half the people I interview say, well, let me tell you about what I did here. And they start telling me about what they did in their last job. And it's because they're so anxious for me to hear about the things that they've done, they're not listening to my question. So I'll let them go for a few minutes, then I'll gently redirect them back and say, hey, that's important, but what I asked you was what do you want to do going forward? So whatever it is, if you've got to take deep breaths, if you've got to skip your morning coffee, whatever it is, to calm down and listen to the questions that are being asked, that's probably the number one problem that we see with interviews, where people screw them up when they're qualified. There are 3 big areas of exposure in an interview. Okay? First one, every HR person out there has been trained to ask a question about strengths and weaknesses. The strengths is pretty easy. The weakness question can be a tough one. How many people are comfortable answering what their greatest weakness is? Okay, that's pretty good. That's above average for a group like this. Weakness is a loaded question. And we've all got tons of weaknesses. If my wife were here, she could give you a whole list of mine. But what you want to do as a general rule of thumb is take something that's unrelated to the job and close the loop on it, okay? If you're going into interview as a project manager, you probably don't want to say that you struggle with organization. We all could probably be better organized. I think that's a universal statement. But with weakness, there's 2 things. There's what you say, and there's what they hear. And the 2 are not always the same. And so when possible, you want to pick something unrelated to the job. And then by closing the loop on it, what I mean is, here's my weakness. I'm aware of it. Here's how I handle it. And so if we use organization as a weakness, again, to continue with our example, you'd say, hey, you know what, early in my career, I really struggled with organization. I realized that was a problem, so I got some training. Now I use Microsoft Project. You know, I give myself gate reviews along the life of the project to make sure I stay on track, and it's actually been called out as a strength in my last 2 reviews. So you're taking a weakness, saying you're aware of it, telling how you handle it. You can use that same formula for any weakness you're going to use. Okay? That's exposure area number 1, where people screw them up. Exposure area number 2, reason for change. Why'd you leave your last company? Why'd you leave your last 4 or 5 companies? At some point in any interview process, you will get asked that question. Okay? That is a very tough one for people, because anytime you leave a job, whether you leave on your own or whether you're asked to leave, it's a very emotional topic. It's kind of a balloon question where you're poking the balloon to see what comes out. You wouldn't believe how many people I've interviewed where they go on for 10 minutes about how unfair it was, about how it wasn't right, about this or about that. You know, that may be true, but you're going to win the battle and lose the war. You know, what you're looking for and reason for change, you never want to say anything negative about a previous company. It's better to be moving towards something than away from something. So if you're talking about why you went from one company to another, it's better to talk about the positive attributes of the spot you were moving towards rather than the negative attributes of the one you were coming out of. And one sentence. Boom, and stop. Trust me, if they want more information, they will ask you. But so many times people go on and on about being, they let me go because I was the oldest, they let me go because I was the youngest, they let me go because I was the lowest paid, they let me go because I was the highest paid, the boss didn't like me. Even if any of that stuff is true, it's going to hurt you in the interview process, so you want to stay away from it. Last big area that people screw up quite often in an interview is compensation. How many people are comfortable answering the question, sit down in an interview, early stages, how much money do you want to make?
I usually leave it blank because I feel like it is what it is. You're going to pay me what you feel I'm worth as well as what the base pay is in the company if I'm just starting out in the company. I just leave it blank. I don't really go in there with an expectation of demanding of you to give me an X amount of hours or I won't work. I'll work. You know, that's the way I've always done the jobs.
Well, and that's, the comment was that leave that blank on the application, and that's certainly strategically going down the right road. When you hit compensation, if you throw a number out, only three things can happen and two are bad. You can go too high and prematurely disqualify yourself from a position that you might be interested in. You can go too low and leave money on the table, which nobody wants to do that. Or you can hit it right on the button. And the odds of hitting it right on the button at that point in the process are pretty slim. And so from a strategic perspective, you're best off deferring once, something along the lines of, hey, I've been impressed with your company. If you made me an offer, I'd seriously consider it. They may come back to me and say, good try, Mike, but seriously, what are you looking for? At that point, you're better off giving a range. And it doesn't matter if that range is 40 to 50,000, 80 to 100,000, 150 to 200,000. All of those ranges have the same key flaw in an answer, and that if you give them 80 to 100, our old joke is the candidate hears, or the company hears 80, the candidate hears 100, and they wind up 20 grand apart. So softer edges, and then circle back and be opportunity focused. In other words, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add, there's been one other strategy that I've seen used, and that's tell me what the budgeted range is for the position. And many times they don't know, but at least that puts it back on them to respond with something to give you more to react to versus your strategies work, but I think that you have to be prepared for someone who's as well prepared as you are in that situation to be able, because it's a negotiation, and you want to not give up something before you need to.
Yeah, and ultimately, the time to negotiate, I would say two things. The amount of negotiation that people perceive goes on for jobs is much greater than the amount that actually goes on for jobs. Because most jobs, with a few exceptions, companies got a range of compensation for how they've got that position graded. Chances are they don't want to bring anyone in beyond midpoint of range because that's a pretty typical policy. So they've got a window, and a lot of times that question is asked, if it's asked early in the process, just to verify efficiency. What they want to make sure is that they're not going to have someone interview 3 times, tie up 6 of their managers, everybody likes the person, wants to hire them, and then they don't fit in the compensation range. So usually when it comes up early, it's just to verify fit. There are a lot of strategies, and certainly asking what the target compensation range for the position is one. Ultimately, the interviewer picks the music and you have to dance to it. So if they want you to answer the question, you're going to have to answer it some way. If we were looking to get back to the ranges, to take the hard edges off of it, you could say something in the 80s or 90s or something just short of 6 figures, but focus back to the opportunity. But I was just going to say, as an example of how to focus back to the opportunity, finding a company where I can make a respected contribution and be a valued member of the team is what's most important to me.
I was going to say, why do you think that they ask that without really offering that information? Do you think that the employer, or prospective employer, is trying to see how you react under pressure for something like that? I mean, it just seems to me like, you know, to try to just, they should just tell you the range. This is the range that we have for this position. And when they ask you how much, you know, what are you looking for? You know, I mean, how do you know? How do you, my first impression is to tell them what I feel like I really am worth. But then it's that whole mindset of, okay, well, am I going to guess too high and knock myself out? I just don't understand why employers do that. Are they looking to get some sort of reaction out of you? Or are they just to, okay, this person doesn't think enough of themselves, or trying to limit? It just seems like you could just cut the chase. This is the range before you even go into it.
Well, I think there's a couple of potential answers for that. I'll tell you, and every company has their own reasons for doing things. I'll tell you why I have my people ask people what they're looking for before they outline the range for a position. It's because we get a much more accurate answer that way. In other words, if we say, hey, this position pays $60,000 a year, we might have someone who's making 90, who's unemployed, that says, that's awesome, I'll take it. Or we could have someone who is making 45 that says that's perfect. And so we get a much more accurate representation of where someone comes from if we ask the question first. And I think that's why I don't think most companies are playing as many games with that question as candidates may perceive they are. Most of the time they're just trying to verify fit to make sure that the interview process is productive.
Right, because if you take that, position for that, you're not going to be satisfied because you're just not going to make the money.
That's why companies are pretty reluctant. You know, I'll have plant managers who haven't worked in a while that say, hey, I'll take a production manager job on second shift. Well, it isn't that they can't do that job. Companies just know that they're probably going to keep their job search going and look for something more at the level they were at previously. Mm-hmm. And so that's probably why they ask it first. The big thing is be direct, sincere, honest. That's your greatest tool in an interview. The last one on this is key as well, especially in a competitive job market like this. With the tools that are available today, there is no reason, no excuse to go in unprepared to an interview. You can get on the internet, and between Google and web pages and everything else, you should be able to have a real good idea of what a company does, their current business climate, any current events, any major initiatives. You can find all that stuff in probably an hour. You wouldn't believe how many people, I'll get back to you, you're shaking your head in the back, I'll get back to you in just a second. You wouldn't believe how many people go into an interview that I've had go in and say, hey, what does your company do? What are you guys all about? It's not a very good question, especially if you're competing with a number of other people for the job. Now, that's kind of a simplistic example. Most people are a little more savvy than that. But if you can go into an interview and ask a person, hey, I see that you're really making a push to get into renewable energy. What's been the market response? What are the greatest challenges you're facing in that market? I find that very interesting. That's going to immediately make you appear more serious, more well-prepared, more well-informed than most of the people you're competing with. So that preparation is really a key piece. Also going through your own resume, knowing what's on it, being able to speak to your bullet points. We all have stuff that may be on our resumes from 10, 12 years ago. Just go through it and refresh, so if they ask you a question about it, you can answer it. You know, you can talk about things that you did. That preparation is key. Now, you were shaking your head in the back when I said you could find that info in an hour. Did you have a question as far as that went?
Some of it goes back to directly, because I'm looking at getting into green remodeling, green energy efficiency stuff.
Okay.
And there are several breaking, leading edge technologies that, weren't around 3 years ago, 6 months ago type of thing. That, to even get a comparison of what is an installer of a water reuse system even expect to make, because nobody's even seriously doing it yet. Or home wind energy stuff. They're just getting that stuff onto the market.
Well, let me preface or maybe explain my point. I don't think that you're going to be able to go on to the internet or other tools and find out about upcoming products that haven't been patented yet, or the R&D stuff, or maybe the exact ins and outs of a market that a company is targeting. But I think you can go ahead and find out about that company. I think you can go into that interview well informed. If you look, Cascade Engineering is a company in town that's moving towards a lot of renewable energy products. You may not be able to go out and figure out what their latest and greatest product is going to be, because their competitors are trying to figure out that same thing. But you can certainly go out and find out an awful lot about Cascade Engineering before you go and talk to them. And so when I talk about preparation, I'm not saying you can find every answer, but I think you can get pretty well prepared for just about any company in an hour's time if you're efficient using the internet. Now, what I like to do with these is leave a lot of time for question and answer, because a lot of times that's the most productive. So if you guys want to ask me anything about companies, the market, interviewing, resumes, any of the stuff we covered today, please throw it out there. Nothing's out of bounds. Go ahead.
I have a lady friend that's at college with me, and she was downsized as an X-ray tech. She's got all her certification.
Okay.
Could I get her to contact your agency about, because she's still trying to get back into, back employed in the medical field as an X-ray tech?
She certainly could.
Is the current.
Most of what we focus on, what you'll find is recruiters are typically, the good ones are specialized in a certain niche. And it'll tend to be either around a certain industry or around a certain geography, or maybe both. What we focus on is the engineering operations and supply chain management, IT, and finance and accounting. And so we don't place X-ray techs per se, but certainly if she wanted to contact us, if there was somebody who worked in that space that we could refer her to, we would.
Is this a paid service, or is this a free service, or fee for service?
No, like I said before, never ever pay a recruiter up front. The hiring companies pay our fees, and you should stay away from any recruiter that tries to charge you initially. Sure, go ahead.
Does the hiring company pay you based on the salary the person is going to be hired, or not really?
Typically. There are a few exceptions to that, but the majority of the time, our fee is based on a percentage of the starting salary for the person that's hired.
So in that way, you are on the same boat with the clients who are looking for, trying to look for a better paid job.
Certainly, if people are looking to improve their situation or find a better job, we help people with that type of thing all the time. Our biggest thing, and what I stress to my team, is in our business, quality is accuracy. And that means we need to be accurate in the information that we're giving hiring companies about candidates. We need to be accurate in the information that we're giving candidates about hiring companies. And so as long as we're accurate in all of our communications there, then if there's a good fit between the two, it'll typically come together pretty easily.
I have another question.
Sure, go ahead.
Does the hiring company pay you for a certain period of time, or it's ongoing?
Yes. Both. The question was, do hiring companies pay us for a certain period of time, or is it ongoing? We're pretty flexible in how we structure things to meet the business needs of hiring companies. So we do those type of things either way. Mm-hmm.
More companies are going to places like Kforce for this pre-screening, I guess you could say, or for analyzing more resources available. Because I know you said you have a million candidates for each job post. You guys help in that process?
The recruiting industry in general has been growing for some time now. It's a $98 billion industry. So it's big. A lot of people don't realize it's that big.
Sizing the HR departments in most companies?
That's certainly a factor. The other thing is, with productivity where it is, just about everybody is stretched pretty thin. So the opportunity cost of leaving a position open or having to interview 15 or 20 candidates to find a winner is pretty significant. So we our goal is to come in and make the process much more efficient, get a company 3 candidates, have them choose one, and move on.
You guys are pretty successful at what you
We have been. We're the largest locally. We've been here for 26 years. Nationally, we've been around for 44, did over $1 billion last year, so makes us one of the oldest, largest technical recruiters out there. Sure.
You say you're a technical recruiter. Okay, like, he has a friend that's medical, my husband's sales. How do you find a specific recruiter for your skills?
The internet can be a great tool for that. You can also ask colleagues. If people are out of work, they can go back to the organization that they just left and ask, hey, do you guys ever use recruiters? Would you recommend anyone that you feel is strong? A lot of it's word of mouth that way. And then they have them talk to a few and make sure they're thorough and complete, and when they talk to them, make sure they understand what he's looking for.
So if it's just, I'm just curious, so if somebody, are these employers looking for people that are contract based, or are they looking to hire them as an employee to their organization?
We do both.
50/50?
We do both of those things.
So
Go ahead.
your pay is based off a percentage of the contract then? Full contract, or is it
This is a little more focused on our business than most of these conversations go, but in a contractual scenario, there's a pay rate for the candidate. There are other fixed and variable costs that we have associated with having an employee, Social Security, statutory benefits, unemployment, all that stuff. Then we'll bill the hiring company on an hourly rate, and the difference between our bill rate and the cost of the pay and all the benefits, and that is our profit portion. What else can I answer for anybody?
guys on the market?
Hmm?
Do you have stock?
Yes. We have stock. I believe we're rated a buy. Right now we're traded on the NASDAQ. KFRC is the symbol. Sure.
What is the average length of the hiring company pays?
The average, I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you asking the average length for a contractual assignment, or are you,
The hiring company pay your agency, like,
how do our collections run? They'd be comparable to any other business. Longer than we would like and probably shorter than the company's paying would like is how I would answer that. It would be all over the place.
Typical range
Yeah,
the
typical
person
range.
placed. Do you find that most of your successful candidates are 35 to 50,000 or under 20,000?
Is that what, I would say most of the, if you look from a compensation perspective, we're probably in that 60 to 150 is where we play in that range. And there are exceptions to that. We've placed people, down to 40, 35, and we've placed some people beyond 150, but that's the general ballpark. What else can I answer?
What's the general feeling of the employment outlook in the next 3 to 5 years?
I would preface that by saying there are smarter people than I am trying to figure out that same thing right now. If you look from a general sense, right now the market stinks. I think everybody knows that. It's all over. I do think we are seeing more hiring activity now than we have in the last 5 or 6 months. It's still not as much as we would like to see, but we're starting to see some positive things come out. In West Michigan, for better or worse, we've got an awful lot of automotive and an awful lot of office furniture. So we need people to start buying those kind of high-end capital goods to drive the economy in general. Ford just announced that their volume is going up 10% for the remainder of the year. And I think one of the phenomena that we're getting to is that a lot of the inventory in all of those chains has been burned through. So if we can see some volume in sales for both the office furniture, the automotive companies, that should come back through the chain pretty quickly. I don't think they can absorb that in inventory any longer. So We're cautiously optimistic for Q3. That's when we're projecting things to start to pick up.
Yeah, I realize nobody has a crystal ball, but, are we, do we appear to be entering at least a soft?
I would say we're at the start of the climb out, is my own personal opinion. But if I really knew the answer to that, I'd go to Wall Street and then I wouldn't have to mess with the rest of this stuff. What else can I answer for anybody?
If you do contact Kforce, will we go through an interview process with you about what our qualifications are, what services and goods you could provide for us?
Yeah, the first step, so you know, is a pre-screening where we want to make sure that people's background is a good fit for the areas in which we focus.
Waste your time.
Or the candidate's time, absolutely. If we're not going to be your best avenue to help you, believe me, we'd like to have 3 jobs for everybody. We're just not in that situation right now. So if we're not going to be the best avenue to help someone, we always try and direct them to someone who may be more focused in their market. But the first step would be to apply. We'd take a look, and then if your background looked like a good fit for what we focus on, one of my recruiters would talk to you, get a better feel for what your personal situation is, and then as soon as we had a job that was a good fit, we'd let you know about it and see if it was something you wanted to pursue. Any other questions I can answer for you? Well, thanks. I'll be around for a little bit after this, so if you want to ask me any questions in private, I'll be available. And I appreciate everybody coming in today.